Hi, my name is Taylor Macaro, and today I will be presenting my mind map. Um, it is a representation of my thoughts on this week's lecture, which was a summary of our reading knowledge base from the 20th and 21st century. So right here in the center, I have a photo of a book and a light bulb going off, just because in my mind this entire lecture revolved around thinking, our knowledge of reading. So here we'll start with 1900 to 1919, and I have English instruction written. I have this written because during this time, most educators had thought that reading instruction was the same as developing an appreciation for literature. And then it wasn't until 1908 that reading and literature instruction had become separate ideas. And this had come from The Psychology and Pedagogy of Reading by Edmund Burke Huey. From 1914 to 1919, I had written groundbreaking. That was a word that stood out to me. During this time, Charles Hubbard Judd had announced the distinction between oral and silent reading. So that's where I have the oral and silent reading branching off. And Charles Hubbard Judd had announced that distinction between the two. And then I have silent reading right over here, which William Gray had thought about that and announced that it was more practical than oral reading. So down here we have from 1920 to 1929, and I had written reading is an elaborate procedure. These words had come from Edward Thorndike, and he had established that reading as thinking, and how reading was like an elaborate procedure. He compared it to a math problem. So he had mentioned that understanding a paragraph was like solving a math problem. From 1930 to 1940, the words that stood out for me was fear of the radio. And they compared that to that similar fear of technology today that many of us have. From 1930 to 1940, I had mentioned the basal readers. So this was also during that 1930 to 1940 time period. And the basal readers were considered to be the norm during this time period and taught students to learn to read. It was a type of curriculum, and it consisted of two parts, which was the student workbooks and the teacher's guides. In the 1940s, the Dick and Jane books had come out. So we had gone over the look and say method for that. And then down here we have the 1950s, which during this time there was a major change in reading. The question that was asked that had stood out to me was, how can teaching reading improve? And Flesch had offered when children can write a letter and no sounds, they should move on to letter combos. So this was the period of change during reading. You come up here, I have in 1956, I chose to look into the College Reading Association. So I found this very interesting because the International Reading Association was established in 1956, and this was, as here you can see, I have merged between two groups. The International Reading Association was established in 1956 through a merger of two existing groups, which were the National Association for Remedial Teachers and the International Council for the Improvement of Reading Instruction. So the membership of this association has increased greatly, and there are actually college reading associations all across our nation today, which I thought was pretty cool. When I did my research, there were all different universities online that had the Reading Association present at their school. So I thought that was pretty interesting. In the 1960s, I had written down elementary writing. So elementary writing was huge in the 1960s. And then stemming off from elementary writing, I had the SQ3R, which stands for survey, questions, and then the three R's, which were read, recite, and review. So this was just something to help students get more out of what you read with. So that was just a strategy that they're able to use. There was also the emergence of the DRA, which was directed reading activity. The DRA was taught word identification skills, taught specific reading skills, and set a purpose for reading. So it encouraged the students to monitor their comprehension while they're reading, and that includes the before reading, during reading, and the after reading. And that instructional support comes in the before, during, and after reading. In the 1960s, we also had Kenneth Goodman, who was a big figure during that time frame. Kenneth Goodman had a lot to do with the understanding of miscues and cueing systems, which I had stemming off from Kenneth Goodman. So for miscues were errors readers make while reading as a window into comprehension. And then for our cueing systems, Kenneth Goodman introduced the semantic, the syntactic, and the graphsonic cueing systems. In the 1970s, if we move down here, I had written the whole language theory. So I had written that right down there. And then coming off of our whole language theory was that it paralleled with oral reading or oral reading language. And then stemming off from there, our oral reading was child-centered, thematic, and it included a lot of teachable moments. Down here in the 1980s, we saw a prevailing theme in reading. There were several reviews of failing schools throughout America, nationwide, which was I had written nationwide failure. In the 1990s, the reading wars were over. So they came to the conclusion that the balance here was between phonics and whole language, and this stemmed off of research base. This was all research based, that this would be that happy medium, that good balance of reading. In 1999, I have written the Reading Excellence Program. So the Reading Excellence Program teaches, and I have the Workforce Investment Act. But the Reading Excellence Program teaches every child to read by the end of third grade, and it provides children in early childhood with the readiness and skills they need to learn to read once they enter school. The Workforce Investment Act was also a big part of 1999. In 2000, I have assessment written. So there was a reading panel that was introduced in 2000, and they would assess approaches to teach children to read. So I have the different reading approaches that they would assess, and that would be phonemic awareness, systematic phonics instruction, guided repeated oral reading, vocabulary, and intensive professional development for teachers. So the panel found all of these to be beneficial and significant to children learning how to read. Down here in 2002, there was a reform plan in action, and that was under President Bush. So on January 8th of 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act was a part of President Bush's educational reform plan. And I have the date written that this plan was put into action. And then I also have stronger teacher accountability, because this was something that President Bush was looking to hold. More teacher accountability was what he wanted to get out of the No Child Left Behind Act. In 2011, I had written learning standards. So these learning standards were for all students in grades K to 12. These learning standards were expectations that were set for students and that would prepare them for work and college, which I had stemming off of our expectations. The learning standards were evidence-based. The learning standards were meant to create student success, and the learning standards were clear and concise, so everybody understands where you are supposed to be at by the end with that grade level of goals are. And again, this is for the K to 12 grade levels. So overall, this was my mind map for this week's lecture.